So this is The Wide Window Part 2, or as I like to call it, a series of fortunate bullshit. So in this episode, the apparent last will and testament left by Aunt Josephine puts the Baudelaires into the care of Captain Sham, who quite obviously is Count Olaf. But the Baudelaires manage to figure out that in this suicide note is a secret message left by their grammar Nazi of an aunt. And this is where the bullshit starts coming in. So they start decoding the message inside the library of Josephine's house, but because a hurricane is coming, the house starts falling apart. Naturally. What is unnatural about it is the house is like, let's say the floor is set up like this. It keeps going like that. It's ridiculous. So, bullshit number one. Bullshit number two was, at some point during this, Klaus ends up doing a backflip. Whether or not that was intentional, I have no idea. Still calling bullshit on it. Bullshit number three was, as the library is falling, going, this book falls called An Incomplete History of Secret Organizations, which we've technically been seeing since episode 1. And it just so happens to open up to a page that depicts the spyglass that Klaus used to have, and that the secret organization seems to be constantly using. Bullshit number 4 was Klaus manages, while still holding on for dear life, manages to get a hold of this picture that depicts Josephine, Monty, and their parents in front of a lumber mill. So then they get out of the house, the whole thing falls off the cliff, which quite frankly I'm surprised they didn't do that sooner. And they go to find Josephine, who is hiding out in a cave on the other side of the lake. Which brings me to bullshit number 5, the fact that they managed to get across the lake through a hurricane in a sailboat with no problems whatsoever. So they get Josephine, manage to convince her to come back to town by using her irrational fear of real estate agents against her. You know, I know it's in the book, but really? Real estate agents? I mean, I know that irrational means it doesn't have to make sense. In fact, it means it doesn't make sense. But even the most irrational fears usually have some sense of logic. Why real estate agents? Lemony Snicket, you are a weird man. So they make their way across the lake, and what I believe is now bullshit number 6, the special leeches that are in the lake, which, again, it's in the book, but they're these little leeches that act more like piranhas, and not even so much piranhas, but piranhas in movies, where they're normally harmless, but if they smell food, like any kind of food, they turn into the most terrifying things imaginable. It's ridiculous. And of course, before going out to the lake, Josephine had eaten a banana. But then we get this episode's crown jewel of bullshit. So, while their boat is being torn to shreds by the leeches, they're trying to essentially, the Baudelaires are trying to make a signal fire, which, you know, smart move, try to get someone's attention. The only way they can make a signal fire, since everything's wet, is take a bit of Josephine's clothing, specifically her scarf, and use a binocular to magnify light from the nearby lighthouse to set it on fire. Which, it's not going to work. You just know that there's no way in hell a lighthouse can light it up enough to set it on fire. Then the Baudelaire's parents go flying over the lake in a plane. The father takes a pair of binoculars, looks down, tries to see what's going on the lake. The light reflects from the lighthouse into the binoculars Klaus is holding, setting the thing on fire. And then the parents fly off, presumably gonna crash somewhere. That was... my God. But then, by coincidence, Count Olaf shows up in a boat, saves their asses, and promptly throws Josephine overboard, killing her. Or with the leeches. When they get back to shore, it is revealed that Captain Sham is Count Olaf in front of Mr. Poe. He doesn't do jack shit. Count Olaf and his troop escape yet again, but to my surprise, so do the Baudelaires. They decide to hitch a ride on a truck that is heading for the lumber mill that they saw in the picture. And the reason why this surprises me is because I'm pretty sure that in the books, the Baudelaires didn't start going it alone until after book 5. Like, they were still being tossed around from Guardian to Guardian by Mr. Poe for at least the next 2 books. I'm interested to see how else they change the story like that. Hopefully not too much as to piss off huge fans of the book. Some things that I noticed with this episode is, first off, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in a previous vlog, but with every 2 episodes, like when they start off what would be a new book, the lyrics to the theme song change to reflect what's going to happen in the story. In part 1, it's just Neil Patrick Harris's singing voice, which is great. But in part 2, they have Neil Patrick Harris sing the new lyrics in the voice that Count Olaf is using for his current disguise, which is really interesting. So like, for part 2 of The Reptile Room, he's singing the specific lyrics as Stefano. For part 2 of this, he's singing it as Captain Sham. So that's really cool. I've also noticed the CG on the show is terrible. Like, okay, terrible's a bit too strong of a word, but it's not very good. Like, you have this weird thing where Sonny dives down for Olaf's fake peg leg, starts chewing the hell out of it. It just looks terrible. But then, at the end of the episode, the Baudelaires look up at the sky and see a bunch of ducks flying in the sky in the V-shape. The animation on those ducks almost makes Birdemic look like good animation. Almost. Almost. Not quite there yet. And one final problem that I had with this episode was during the scene where the house is being blown around and falls off the cliff, the music is way too lighthearted for that. Like, this is supposed to be a tense scene. You don't quite know if the Baudelaires are going to get out of this alive yet. But the music sounds like they're in a fun house. A very demented fun house, to be sure, but still. And with this episode ending, most of my memories of the books are complete crap. Like, I only really remember books 1, 2, and 3, mostly because I remember watching the movie, and I remember it being pretty faithful to the books. I remember some details about 5, 6, and some things from book 10 onwards. Yeah, from now on, at least for a while, I'm not comparing this to the books anymore. So, next time is The Miserable Mill.